Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. They broke into my garage while I was out of town, stole $200,000 worth of custom robotics. No warrant, no warning, just a rogue HOA with clipboards and crowbars. What they didn't know? A teenager's drone camera caught everything. This isn't just revenge. I never liked fences. I always figured if someone wanted to look over the line and see what I was doing, they'd get bored before they got nosy. My land was my retreat, 2 acres just outside of Tucson, wrapped in dry brush and silence, and legally as far removed from the Vista Hollow HOA as I could get. I made damn sure of that when I bought the place 5 years ago. Spent extra on legal review just to make certain no clipboard-wielding suburban tyrant could tell me how tall my garage should be or what shade of beige was acceptable. The garage was my pride. A separate 30 by 50-foot structure I built myself, cinder block and steel, with its own power system, climate control, and security lighting. Inside, it looked more like a robotics R&D lab than a storage space. 3 industrial 3D printers, a German micromill, a pair of vision-guided robotic arms, and a custom laser etching rig that I'd assembled from spare parts, and a reckless disregard for my own corneas. Total investment? North of $200,000 easy. It was where I made my living. I serviced automation systems for factories all over the Southwest. Some weeks, I made more from that garage than most guys made in a month, and every piece of gear in there was either rare, expensive, or borderline irreplaceable. I had no problem keeping to myself. The people in Vista Hollow didn't like that. They'd been trying to fold me into their HOA since day one. It started polite. Welcome letters, invitations to community enhancement meetings. I sent back copies of my deed with a handwritten "not a member" scrawled across every page. Then came the passive-aggressive phase. Anonymous notes about my unkempt facade. Translation, I didn't mow twice a week. Questions about noise concerns. Translation, CNC router running at 3 a.m. Eventually, they escalated to letters with legalese. I escalated with a lawyer of my own and mailed them a cease and desist wrapped around a notarized disclaimer. I had opted out of HOA jurisdiction at purchase. Period. Still, they circled like vultures. My property was the only one on the street without their seal of conformity. I guess it made them itchy. It was early August when I got called out to Houston for an urgent on-site job. I double-checked the garage before leaving. Deadbolt on the main door, padlock on the side, motion light set. There wasn't a camera inside the garage. I'd meant to install one, but the place always felt more like a vault than a risk. 3 days later, I pulled into my driveway, dragging luggage and post-flight caffeine withdrawal. That's when I noticed the side gate of the garage was hanging open. Not ajar. Open. As in, padlock gone, latch bent like someone had taken a pry bar to it. My heart dropped. I dropped my bag, sprinted the gravel path, and yanked the garage door up. Chaos. Everything had been moved. Drawers open, shelves bare, cords hanging where devices had once been mounted. The German mill? Gone. The laser unit? Gone. 2 custom-built motor controllers? Gone. 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 It hit like a punch to the gut. I backed out of the garage and stumbled inside my house to call the police. When the officers arrived, I could tell they weren't expecting much more than a missing lawnmower. But once they stepped inside the garage and saw the rows of empty mounts and the specialized tools that remained untouched, their attitude changed. One of them knelt near the side door and pointed to metal shards around the lock housing. Looks like a forced entry, professional too, clean pry marks. Whoever did this knew what they were going after. I didn't have security footage, and the cops didn't sugarcoat it. Hard to follow up without plates, prints, or cameras. We'll take the report and canvass the neighborhood, but... The but hung in the air like dust. I walked the perimeter after they left, searching for anything. Tire tracks, tool marks, shoe prints. Found none. The grass was too dry. The gravel didn't care. My neighbor to the north, Jerry, was a member of the HOA board. When I asked him if he'd seen anything unusual, he barely looked up from his lawn blower. Nope, he said, shaking his head with performative sympathy. You sure it wasn't someone you hired? I didn't bother answering. The guy had been passive-aggressively hostile since I refused to join their little suburban monarchy. That night, I stayed up late cataloging everything that was missing. It wasn't just money, it was my livelihood. Most of this equipment wasn't just rare, it was unique. Some of it I'd built myself over years. Insurance would cover some of it, maybe, eventually. But I needed my tools yesterday. Clients didn't wait. The next morning, a notice appeared on the Vista Hollow HOA bulletin board website, which I still monitored out of spite and curiosity. Community alert: unauthorized hazardous equipment addressed. In accordance with safety oversight procedures, HOA compliance volunteers identified potential fire hazards and unapproved industrial equipment on a neighboring property. A visual inspection was conducted. The matter has been resolved in the interest of communal safety. My blood went cold. They were talking about me. I hit refresh 3 times. It didn't change. Resolved. What the hell did that mean? I printed the post, circled it with a red pen, and pinned it to my fridge. There was no fire department report, no emergency alert, no permission, no warrant. Just a self-appointed inspection during my absence, and a smug little message that danced around admitting what they'd done. They hadn't just stolen from me, they'd done it like they were performing a civic duty. And suddenly, I knew. This wasn't over. The next morning, I made myself coffee I couldn't taste and sat at the kitchen table staring at the printed HOA notice like it might grow a conscience. Visual inspection. Like busting into someone's locked garage and rummaging through 20 years of sweat equity was no different from glancing over a fence. Resolved in the interest of communal safety. My laser cutter didn't even use flammable gases. It was sealed, self-contained. The only thing it endangered was their fantasy of suburban uniformity. I sent a letter to the HOA registered mail. 3 pages, lawyer-approved language, formal demand for explanation, and itemization of what exactly they thought they'd resolved. I attached a copy of the police report and photographs of the broken latch and missing equipment. No response. The silence wasn't just insulting, it was tactical. They were stalling, laying low. I knew the game, drowned the situation in red tape and indifference until I gave up. Problem was, I don't give up. I just get angrier and more efficient. That afternoon, I filed an amended police report. I met with Detective Alicia Gomez at the Tucson substation. She was sharp, skeptical, and refreshingly uninterested in HOA drama until I handed her the HOA's own community bulletin and explained what was missing from the garage. You're saying the HOA entered your property while you were out of state, broke your lock, and removed industrial equipment worth over $200,000, and then posted about it online? That's what I'm saying. Her eyes narrowed. Any footage? No cameras inside the garage. It's my dumb mistake. She nodded slowly, writing. All right, we'll dig. Doesn't mean we'll find much. But if they posted that, and you're not in their jurisdiction, that's something. I left feeling equal parts validated and powerless. A detective might take it seriously, but without hard proof, HOA would just say I left the garage open or sold the gear myself and cried wolf for insurance. Later that night, I walked the property line. Motion lights flickered on and off, reacting to every bushy rabbit and desert breeze. My eyes were drawn again and again to the side gate, the twisted metal, the empty bracket where the lock had been. I felt like I was standing on a stage with no audience, performing outrage for nobody but myself. The next morning, I noticed someone had left a folded flyer tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. It was glossy, full-color, HOA propaganda. We keep Vista Hollow beautiful. Right below the slogan, a stock photo of smiling neighbors planting shrubs together, like it was 1952 and nobody had ever heard of litigation. I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash, but then I paused. The flyer hadn't blown in. It hadn't been mailed. Someone had walked up my private drive past the private property sign and deliberately placed it on my windshield. Someone was sending a message. I opened my email. There was a new post on the Vista Hollow forum. I wasn't supposed to have access. I'd set up a dummy profile under the name Joanne Meeks 6 months ago when the HOA president started floating voluntary compliance zone proposals. This one was titled, "A Reminder No One is Above Safety." The body of the post read, "We understand recent events have generated confusion. While legal ownership is respected, communal well-being is our highest priority. Non-participating properties should be especially cautious. Safety inspections will continue where necessary. We appreciate the community's understanding and support as we enforce standards that protect all residents." There was a timestamp that matched the day I was in Houston. I read it 3 times. Inspections will continue where necessary. I stared at those words and felt something slide into place in my brain. This wasn't some rogue break-in. This was a pattern, a protocol, an unofficial policy cloaked in euphemism. They'd done this before. I called Jerry again, my neighbor and HOA board member. No answer. I walked over and knocked. Nothing. I could hear his TV inside, tuned loud to a rerun of Jeopardy, but no one came to the door. I stood there for a while, wondering whether he was ignoring me or afraid to get involved. Either way, he was a dead end. It was the other neighbor, across the cul-de-sac, who gave me pause. Mr. Baker, retired Navy, quiet, the type who wore tucked-in polos and waved with 2 fingers. That morning, when I pulled out to run errands, he was standing on his lawn, hosing the dust off his sidewalk. Our eyes met. He looked away, hesitated, then turned the hose off and walked back inside without a word. Something was wrong here. Later that evening, I got a call from my lawyer, Greg Tanner. He was calm but concerned. They're claiming it was a perimeter-based visual compliance check. That's their phrasing. Through a locked garage door. They're denying entry, claim the lock was already broken. I almost laughed. And the missing equipment. They're unable to confirm removal of any property and advise you to consult your insurer. Of course they do. Greg sighed. This is going to take time. Unless we get something solid, witnesses, footage, we're stuck in allegations and denials. I hung up and walked back out to the garage. The place looked like a battlefield. Bare mounts, empty hooks, a layer of dust where the equipment had once stood, clean outlines left like shadows of a robbery. That night, I started sketching out camera placements for every corner of the property. I'd learned my lesson, but I was still bleeding. And I wasn't about to let them walk away smiling. I wasn't expecting anyone that day, least of all a teenager with shaky hands and a face pale enough to make me think something had happened to his dog. I opened the door, still barefoot and holding a wrench, and there he was. Evan Baker, Mr. Baker's son, 17, maybe 18, tall, skinny, nervous as hell. He didn't say anything at first, just looked over his shoulder like he thought someone might be watching. Then he reached into his pocket and held out a USB drive. "You need to see this," he muttered. I didn't ask questions, just stepped aside and motioned him in. We sat at my kitchen table. I plugged the drive into my laptop, heart already pounding from the way he was shaking. The folder was simply named CAM_ARCHIVE. Inside, time-stamped files, videos, dozens of them. "I mount a GoPro up high on the utility pole in our yard," Evan explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's for my drone nav tests. The HOAs always hassle Dad, so I keep logs in case someone screws with our stuff. It's motion-triggered. 2 weeks of video, constantly overwriting. One file was marked, HOA break-in.move. I clicked it. The camera angle was wide, perfect, overlooking the back alley and the approach to my garage's side door. There they were, clear as daylight. Karen Slater in her ridiculous white power blazer and clipboard combo, flanked by 2 HOA compliance officers. Phil Jenkins, the human refrigerator, and a smaller guy I didn't recognize. All 3 were in community oversight branded polos like they were there to fix a swing set, not commit a felony. I watched Karen gesture at my side gate, speaking animatedly. The camera had no audio, but her body language didn't leave much room for interpretation. Phil pulled a crowbar from the back of a van. My van. The damn thing had Community Repair Van printed on the side, complete with a Vista Hollow HOA logo and a phone number. Not subtle. Phil jammed the crowbar into the padlock. A few yanks, a sharp snap, and the gate popped open. They walked in. The timestamp showed they were inside for almost 20 minutes. Then came the worst part. They started coming out with boxes. Carefully. Deliberately. Karen directed them like she was supervising a moving crew. One of the men carried out my laser assembly in both arms. Another had the German Mills control board. At one point, Phil turned to the others and said something directly to the camera, unaware he was being filmed. I couldn't hear it, but Evan leaned forward and whispered it, having already listened with audio enhancement. He says, "Hold it level. This thing's worth more than my car." I paused the video, just stared at the frame, Karen's face frozen mid-smirk. The furgon's door open, packed neatly with my equipment. My business, my livelihood. When I finally looked at Evan, I couldn't speak. I just reached across the table and squeezed his shoulder. "You did the right thing," I told him. He nodded, swallowing hard. "They told my dad not to talk to you. HOA sent him a warning letter last week. He didn't know I had this camera. I wired it on my own." "You're a damn genius," I muttered. I copied the footage to 3 backup drives and made encrypted cloud uploads just in case. Then I drove straight to the police station and requested a meeting with Detective Gomez. She didn't even wait for a conference room, watched the video on my laptop in the hallway, one hand resting on her hip, the other slowly curling into a fist. "This isn't just forced entry," she said. "This is organized theft." She radioed someone mid-sentence and called for a forensic tech to meet us at my house. Within 4 hours, she had filed for a search warrant against Karen's brother, whose name was on the van's registration. She also requested warrants for Phil Jenkins and the HOA's community storage unit, which, as it turned out, was being rented under an alias tied to Vista Hollow's discretionary fund. Greg, my lawyer, dropped everything to meet us that afternoon. When I showed him the footage, he exhaled slowly and muttered, "Well, this changes everything." Karen, apparently unaware that her HOA expedition had been caught on film in glorious 1080p, was still walking around the neighborhood like she owned it. Greg grinned when I told him. "I hope she smiles for the mugshot," he said. The next morning, a convoy of marked and unmarked vehicles rolled into the neighborhood like a SWAT team without the urgency. The sheriff's office hit Karen's brother's house first. Within 10 minutes, officers were hauling out equipment I recognized immediately. My custom controller, a fused lens housing with my initials engraved inside, a calibration kit only 2 manufacturers in the U.S. even knew how to service. They weren't subtle. They didn't need to be. Meanwhile, officers knocked on Phil Jenkins's door and reportedly found more equipment boxed up in his garage, ready for shipping. Some of it was already listed on Facebook Marketplace, poorly disguised with stock photos and bullshit descriptions like lightly used milling controller, German made. They took it all. Karen wasn't arrested yet. She wasn't home. But the net was tightening. She must have gotten word, though, because by sundown her lawyer had already tried calling Greg to discuss a resolution. Greg laughed and hung up. That night, I sent Evan a private message. "Your video saved my business, and it's going to do a hell of a lot more than that." He just replied with one word: "Good." It didn't take long for the story to spread. In a neighborhood where people once whispered about overgrown hedges, the sight of county sheriffs dragging industrial-grade equipment from garage after garage hit like a bomb. By noon the next day, Vista Hollow's streets were lined with gawkers pretending to walk their dogs, lawn chairs popping up on curbs like it was parade day. They weren't waving flags. They were watching a regime collapse. I stayed quiet. Let the cops do their job. I'd already handed over everything. Footage, inventory lists, purchase receipts, serial numbers. They didn't need me playing Batman. They needed a clean chain of evidence. Detective Gomez made it clear. Keep your head down and let the hammers fall. The first hit was Karen's brother. He folded faster than cheap patio furniture, claimed he thought the equipment was discarded material from a community safety program. When the officers pointed out that the discarded gear was listed for sale on 3 platforms under his real name and stored in his personal garage, he reportedly muttered something about miscommunication and then clammed up. Phil Jenkins, on the other hand, tried to bluff, claimed the HOA had legal authority to enter properties suspected of code violations. His lawyer sent over a typed letter referencing a Community Emergency Action Clause in the Vista Hollow bylaws. Only problem, that clause didn't exist. By the 3rd day, warrants were issued for Karen's office, if you could call it that. A converted HOA storage room with a desk, a printer, and a smug little wooden plaque that said President S. Police found spreadsheets, handwritten notes, even internal HOA memos discussing high-value visual assets, and targeted retrieval based on enforcement discretion. Targeted retrieval. They weren't just winging it. They had a list. Mine wasn't the first garage they'd invaded. Gomez briefed me personally that evening. Her tone was flat, official, but her eyes burned with something colder than duty. 3 other residents filed complaints in the last 2 years, she said. They didn't go anywhere. No footage, no follow-up. But the patterns match. Break-ins, missing tools, always framed as compliance visits. We think this has been going on for a while. They didn't just take stuff. They covered it with paperwork. Retroactive fines. Invented violations. They'd bully someone into submission, then steal them blind. And now, they'd hit someone with documentation, legal counsel, and one very pissed-off teenager with a well-placed camera. Greg was already drafting the civil suit. His office buzzed like a war room. Case folders, printed photos, highlighted transcripts from HOA communications. I walked in that morning, and he didn't even look up. "We're going after them all," he said. HOA as an entity, Karen individually, Phil, the brother, and possibly 1 or 2 board members if we can prove they knew. On what grounds? Kleptocracy disguised as community enforcement, he said, grinning. But legally speaking, forced entry, conversion of property, civil conspiracy, loss of business, punitive damages. I'm aiming for 1.2 million. Jesus. Don't thank me yet. This won't be clean. They'll fight like cornered rats. He wasn't wrong. That week, I got my first taste of their strategy. HOA's lawyers started chirping. They filed a statement denying all responsibility, claiming the individuals involved acted outside the scope of their roles. Karen, they said, had personal initiative, and the HOA had no knowledge or approval of any physical action taken on the Branson property. A neat little firewall. Too bad it was already on fire. The van. Paid for with HOA discretionary funds. The branded shirts, HOA property. The inspection forms they used to justify entry, found on HOA letterhead. They even found an internal memo signed KS detailing reallocation plans for problematic non-members. When that hit the news, local Channel 5 broke the story like it was Watergate on HOA steroids. The comment section exploded. I didn't celebrate. I didn't have time. I was in my garage inventorying what came back. The police had recovered about 60% of my missing gear. Some pieces were damaged, careless handling, rust from improper storage. A few of the more delicate components had already been stripped for parts or sold off to third-party buyers across state lines. Gomez said they were working on retrieval, but I wasn't holding my breath. My laser system was gone. Completely gone. Sold, vanished, or dismantled. That one stung. It had taken me 2 years to build. There wasn't a replacement for it. There was only starting over, but I had enough to operate again. I powered on what I could, ran diagnostics. Some machines whirred to life like they'd been waiting. Others blinked errors and died. I sat on the floor and stared at them. Then I stood up, grabbed a notepad, and started sketching a redesign. Smaller footprint, faster assembly, scalable, modular. I wasn't just going to rebuild, I was going to evolve, and I was going to make them pay for the privilege. I thought nothing could surprise me after what I'd already seen. Karen acting like a warlord in khakis, HOA thugs pulling my life's work out of my garage like they were loading up donations for goodwill, but nothing prepared me for the way they came. Crawling into court. We had the first hearing scheduled on a blistering Tuesday morning. Maricopa County Civil Court, Room 4B. Greg and I sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by boxes of evidence, printed exhibits, and an HDMI cable ready to deliver the video footage that had already gone viral in the rest of the world, but, by some miracle, was still under review by the HOA's legal team. Across from us sat Karen, stone-faced, dressed like she was auditioning for the role of betrayed PTA president, and a team of lawyers that looked like they charged by the syllable. The defense's strategy was as transparent as it was pathetic: deny, deflect, and discredit. They opened with a motion to dismiss based on jurisdictional ambiguity, claimed my property wasn't technically outside the HOA because of an outdated plat map from 1996. Greg shut that down with a single packet of title documents and a notarized declaration from the original developer. Then they moved to the footage. They tried to get it suppressed, citing chain of custody concerns. Said it was submitted by a minor, not verified by law enforcement, could be doctored. Greg smiled politely, stood up, and played the full video on the big courtroom monitor. It had been authenticated, watermarked, and time-stamped. The judge leaned forward in her chair. At the moment, Phil said, "Hold it level. This thing's worth more than my car." She stopped the clip. "Do you intend to argue that this footage is fake?" she asked the defense. Their lead counsel cleared his throat. "We believe the footage may not represent the full context. The full context of 3 individuals breaking into a locked garage, removing industrial equipment, and loading it into a van owned by the HOA president's brother," the judge interrupted. "You may want to reassess that position." Karen flinched, not visibly. Not enough for the cameras, but I saw her jaw tighten, her lips pressed together like they were holding back something feral. The trial didn't start officially that day. That was just preliminary arguments. But the tone was set. We were in a war of facts, and we had all the ammunition. In the days that followed, the case picked up speed. Greg issued subpoenas for HOA board communications. We got email chains, hundreds of them. One thread from months before the break-in stood out. Property at 622. Briar Ridge continues to ignore compliance letters. Suggest escalation. Potential hazards present. Recommend oversight action without delay. K. Slater. They had labeled me a non-compliant hazard, and that gave them, in their minds, the right to take what wasn't theirs. Then came the real gem, an internal expense report with the line item, Special Ops, Garage Intervention August 12th, $216.58, gloves, crowbar, cargo blankets. They itemized the break-in, filed it under Special Ops. Greg almost choked laughing when he read it aloud. HOA's defense pivoted fast. This was a rogue operation, they claimed. The board didn't authorize it. Karen acted alone. Phil Jenkins and the other individual were not operating in any official capacity, but we had them on emails, expenses, logos, and a timeline. Their rogue actors were wearing HOA shirts, driving HOA-funded vehicles, and signing HOA inspection slips on official letterhead. It wasn't just bad optics, it was organizational rot in writing. Greg amended our filing to include civil conspiracy. The damages climbed. By now, we weren't just asking for compensation. We were seeking punitive damages for gross misconduct, emotional distress, and business interruption. The number crossed the $1 million mark. I let Greg do the math. I just wanted blood. Meanwhile, Detective Gomez's criminal investigation was rolling like a freight train. Karen hadn't been arrested yet, but we heard murmurs. Subpoenas had gone out. Search warrants had expanded. They were looking into old inspections stretching back 5 years. Turns out my case wasn't just the biggest. It was the cleanest. The one with video. The one with receipts. Other victims started coming forward. A retired mechanic down the road who lost a lift and tool cabinet during a noise complaint inspection. A widow who'd reported her generator stolen after an emergency power audit. HOA had shrugged her off. She thought she'd imagined it. They weren't alone. Karen and her inner circle had treated Vista Hollow like a candy store. If you weren't part of the club, you were fair game. Greg called me late one night. They offered a settlement. How much? $200,000. No admission of guilt. Confidentiality agreement. I almost laughed. They're not scared enough yet, I said. Then let's keep going. The next court date was a full evidentiary hearing. Greg brought Evan in to testify. I asked him if he was sure. He nodded. He sat up straight on the witness stand, voice a little shaky but determined. I mounted the camera for drone testing. I didn't think it would catch something like that. The defense tried to rattle him, asked if he edited the video, if his dad put him up to it, if he misinterpreted what he saw. He looked right at the lawyer and said, "They stole from my neighbor." I don't know how you misinterpret that. I felt a knot loosen in my chest I didn't even know I was carrying. We left the courtroom that day with momentum on our side and the whole damn HOA bleeding credibility by the hour. And I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. Courtrooms have a smell, not like something specific, just a mix of paper, plastic, cold air, and tension. You sit there long enough, you start associating it with the taste of stress in your mouth and the hum of fluorescent lights that never go off. On the day the verdict came down, I was sweating through a shirt I'd barely worn. My throat dry despite the water bottle Greg kept shoving at me like he thought hydration could stop a heart attack. The trial lasted 4 days. 4 brutal, drawn-out, testimony-heavy, detail-bloated days. Karen took the stand on day 2, and I'll give her this. She stuck to her story, said it was all a misunderstanding, that the garage was already open when they arrived, that they were concerned for flammable or dangerous substances, that they didn't remove anything, they were simply documenting and alerting authorities. Greg cross-examined her like a surgeon with a grudge, pulled up emails where she referred to my laser rig as an accident waiting to happen, presented HOA meeting minutes, handwritten and scanned, where Karen had outlined a compliance enforcement field test and designated my property as an unsanctioned industrial hazard. Then he brought up the receipts. The gloves, the crowbar, the goddamn cargo blankets. "Miss Slater," he asked, holding up the HOA expense report like a guilty verdict on letterhead, "can you explain why the HOA purchased crowbars and moving supplies the day before your team entered my client's property?" She blinked. Once, twice. "I wasn't aware of those specific purchases." "You signed the invoice." Silence. I looked across the aisle and caught a flicker of panic in her lawyer's eyes. That was the moment it all started to crack. By the time Phil Jenkins took the stand, the air had changed. He wasn't even trying to be noble, tried to push the blame back on Karen, claimed he was just following instructions, that he thought the entry had been approved. Greg skewered him with one sentence. "Can you explain why you listed a piece of my client's stolen equipment for sale online under your wife's Facebook account?" Phil looked like someone had punched him in the kidneys. The courtroom was full on the last day. Neighbors, press HOA members pretending they didn't know Karen personally. Even a couple of county officials showed up, taking notes like they were already drafting memos titled "How Not to Run a Homeowners Association." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they came back, the room was so quiet I could hear someone in the back coughing into their sleeve. The judge read the verdict in a voice clear and cold. "We, the jury, find the defendant Karen Slater guilty of conspiracy to commit burglary, theft in the first degree, criminal misrepresentation, and abuse of authority." Each charge echoed in my ears like a nail driven into the coffin of their arrogance. Phil got his own verdict. Guilty. 6 years. The third guy still wouldn't give up his real role, got 8. The civil case wrapped shortly after. HOA was found jointly liable for damages due to systemic failure and organizational misconduct. The jury awarded me $980,000 plus full reimbursement of legal costs. Karen's sentencing came a week later. 11 years in state prison. No parole for the first 6. The judge called her a symbol of institutional rot in small-scale governance. HOA's board dissolved. Arizona's Department of Community Regulation suspended Vista Hollow's operational license indefinitely, pending full audit. A state-appointed conservator was brought in. Oversight protocols were rewritten. Every HOA in the region got hit with mandatory compliance reviews. Some boards preemptively resigned to avoid the fallout. Karen was led out of the courtroom in cuffs. For a second, I saw her glance at me. Not rage, not shame, just disbelief. Like she still couldn't process that her little suburban empire had turned to ash. Outside, the media swarmed. Greg handled them. I stood off to the side, sunglasses on, jaw locked. Then I saw Evan, standing with his dad, looking awkward as hell. When I walked over, he gave me a half smile and a "hey" that barely made it out. "You changed everything," I told him. "They would have walked without that video." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with praise. "It just felt wrong, you know?" It was. And you stood up to it. Later that day, the sheriff's department awarded Evan a formal commendation for aiding an active investigation. Local news got his name, his photo, and a quote about doing what was right, even when adults won't. My garage. It was still a mess. The laser system was gone. Some of the tools were bent, scratched, or never coming back. But the damage somehow felt smaller now, contained, labeled, accounted for. I'd won. Not just in court, but against something bigger. The silence after war is always the strangest part. I expected to feel triumphant, maybe even euphoric, but instead I mostly felt tired. Not just from court battles or depositions or the crushing grind of bureaucracy, but from how long I'd spent defending what should have never needed defending. My own property. My own life. The payout from the civil case hit my account 3 weeks later. After Greg carved out his well-deserved share, I was left with enough to replace every piece of gear, upgrade half of it, and still have enough cushion to avoid working another contract for the rest of the year. But I wasn't interested in rest. I wanted control. I poured the funds into redesigning the garage from scratch, reinforced the entryways, installed smart lock systems with encrypted remote access, triple-layered steel doors, infrared perimeter sensors with a low-profile alert system that pinged my phone if someone so much as breathed on the gate, and cameras. So many cameras. Bullet domes, solar trail cams, hidden lens modules buried into the siding. The entire property now looked like a mild-mannered bunker in broad daylight. The outside still had its dusty charm, but inside the line, it was Fort Knox with air conditioning. I started rebuilding the laser system, ordered parts from 3 continents, recruited an old colleague from Houston to consult on thermal calibration. Every day felt like stealing back a little piece of what they'd tried to erase. Word spread fast through the community. Karen's name had become radioactive. Her photo appeared in HOA reform blogs, real estate newsletters, even a state-level ethics forum titled "The Problem of Private Power in Pseudo-Governance." HOA watchdog groups started referencing my case as precedent. Greg got invited to a symposium. I didn't go. I hate podiums. Vista Hollow's replacement administrator reached out once, offered to open a dialogue about rebuilding trust with the non-member residents nearby. I told him politely to take his dialogue and shove it. Maybe not in those words. Maybe exactly those words. The new board posted statements about transparency, reconciliation, and community healing. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. You can't slap a fresh coat of paint on a smoldering crater and call it home improvement. But the real satisfaction came when the banner went up, 10 feet wide, matte black, bold white lettering, not part of HOA, never was, never will be. I bolted it to 2 steel posts just past the driveway, lit it up with motion-activated LEDs. Let it stand there like a scar and a warning. One morning, a UPS guy pulled up and just stood there chuckling. "Damn," he said, snapping a picture. "That's what I'm talking about." It felt good. Not petty, not even performative, just honest. A line in the sand that said, "I remember, Evan stopped by that weekend. He didn't knock, just walked up to the garage where I was hunched over a control panel, soldering contacts. Your cameras freaked me out," he said. "I thought I was getting tagged by Skynet." I grinned. That's the idea. He handed me a small box. Inside, a 3D printed plaque, brushed aluminum with laser-etched text. Evan's Eye in the Sky, 2025. I couldn't help but laugh. "You built this?" He nodded. "Used scraps from the drone project. Thought maybe you'd want a tribute." I bolted it above the new main console the same day. It looked right there, like a reminder that some kids grow up faster than the people who were supposed to protect them. As for me, I started pivoting the business. Began designing home security systems for private clients, custom, discreet, untraceable. There was a market for it, especially with the HOA scandal fresh in the headlines. People suddenly cared a lot more about who had access to their gates. I called it Branson Secure, had a logo designed, an abstract eye inside a shield. Orders came in within a month. I installed 3 systems within Vista Hollow's zip code. No one dared say a word. A few weeks later, Greg called. "You sure you don't want to go public? We could take this national. HOA overreach property rights. It's hot right now. Podcasts, books, maybe even a docuseries." "Let someone else be the face," I said. "I've got work to do." And I did. I wasn't interested in becoming a mascot for righteous vengeance. I just wanted to build in peace. It's been 6 months since the trial. The desert hasn't changed much. Still dry, still golden at dusk, still quiet enough at night to hear the hum of the transformers when the wind is right. But the neighborhood? That's a different story. Vista Hollow looks the same from the outside. Trimmed lawns, coordinated mailboxes, houses painted in every shade of allowable beige. But underneath, it's not what it was. The HOA doesn't patrol anymore. No more unsolicited compliance slips tucked under windshields. No more clipboard crusaders walking the perimeter like it's a demilitarized zone. The interim administrator they brought in after Karen's implosion lasted 3 months. Got out with a formal statement about systemic dysfunction and unsustainable hostility from residents. Translation: nobody wanted the job once they realized they couldn't abuse it. Now the HOA exists in name only, a legal shell. The board's been dissolved. Most former members resigned or moved, some quietly, some under investigation. A few homes are up for sale. One of them used to belong to Phil Jenkins. I drove past it last week, just to look. The blinds were drawn. The grass was dying in neat, perfect rows. It looked exactly like what it was, a house with no heartbeat. The state launched a review committee on small governance ethics. They sent me a letter asking for testimony. I sent them a Dropbox folder instead, documents, footage, and a polite note. Everything you need to know is here. I've already said what I needed to say, in court and in concrete. The banner's still up. People still stop to take pictures of it. Sometimes they honk. One guy left a sticky note on my mailbox that just said, "Hell yeah." Another asked if I'd sell him a copy for his own property 3 towns over. I told him I'd print one for free. Just send me the measurements. The best part? I haven't heard a single word from the HOA since. Not a knock, not a note, not a passive-aggressive newsletter. It's like they finally figured out I'm not part of their game, and never was. Business is good. Branson Secure has clients across 4 counties now. I still work out of the garage, though now it feels less like a workplace and more like a fortress of intentional solitude. Every time I run a diagnostic or install a fresh sensor, I remember why I built this life the way I did. To be mine, not managed by committee. Evan comes by now and then. We installed an aerial perimeter tracker together last month. He coded half the firmware himself. kids going places. He asked if I thought about taking on an apprentice. I said maybe. I'm not a teacher, but hell, maybe I could learn. He still has the original footage on his backup drive. I told him to hold on to it. Not for court, not for leverage. Just as a reminder of what happens when power meets resistance and finds out resistance has better optics. The garage is quiet tonight. Machines idle, lights dimmed. I'm sitting on the old stool with a fresh mug of coffee, watching the perimeter sensors blink in steady sequence like they're breathing. And out by the road, under the glow of those cold LEDs, that banner's still standing. Not part of HOA. Never was, never will be. Sometimes people ask if I'm proud. I just tell them the truth. I'm free.